Assalamualaikum everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Danish TV English language channel of the global voice of the Center for Muslim World Studies. And again, we have the incredible delight to have Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali to continue a very profound conversation that we had in our first part around a whole host of issues, particularly around the way this colonial modernity has impacted large parts of the world, particularly the global South, and a lot of intellectual and conceptual categories that have been largely under interrogated by intelligentsia, certainly of the West, but even within the global South. And I think that that was very important, I think, for us to learn some of that. And I did want to, although we will get to other topics, I did want to allow Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali to speak maybe a little bit more about that, particularly since we are doing this interview on what I hate to call it, but we'll call it Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving Day holiday, which myself and perhaps even Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali would prefer to call Genocide Memorial Day. And I think that he can explain why we call it that. So, Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali, if you can speak about, yes, the specific day, but what did that mean in the history of this Western hegemonic project, beginning this 500-year plus history of kind of Western hegemony, which seems to be actually coming to an end in some ways. But please continue your reflections.
Please remember three things. One is that 1492 is when the Christopher sailed the ocean blue, quote unquote, as they say it, right? I mean,
yes.
1492 is the end of the Muslim presence in Spain or in Iberian Peninsula. Final expulsion of the Muslims from Grenada, and pushed down into Africa. And the other point that must be remembered, and I'm giving you this background to understand where it goes. The Mediterranean world included 3 continents and not Europe alone. Right. As a matter of fact, Europe was the least developed part of the Mediterranean. Mediterra literally means the center of the earth. Yeah. Because the earth as we knew it had 3 continents. There was no Americas, and there was no Australia, there was no Antarctica, there was just Africa, Asia, and Europe.
Yes. Yes.
This, if you look at the circle, if it is it's like a sea, Mediterranean. Yeah. This is Atlantic Ocean. And this is where Hercules had his pillar. If I can give you some Greek mythology to understand, so that the evils from Atlantic won't enter him. So, right. And the center of the civilization was here and not there. Not in the northern part of the Mediterranean.
Right, not in north. Yeah, exactly. Right.
And they were barbarians, all of them.
Right.
They were the Goths, the Visigoths, the Vandals, and all of that. As they begin to develop civilizational tools, they actually wanted to completely usurp all the value system, all the morality, all the culture, all the things that generated out of this Mediterranean basin.
Right.
So therefore, Greek became the mother of culture. People don't realize 250, 260 years, Muslims ruled Greece. Right. And the Greek have a name for it. They call it Turkokratia. They actually have a name for it because they were ruled by the Turks. For 250, 260 years, Greece, the center or the mother of this Western civilization, of this cultural superiority.
Right.
And Rome had moved its capital from Rome, as I was saying, to Constantinople, into what is now the Muslim world, right? So when they get across, I mean, first of all, there was a serious doubt. The church was against Christopher Columbus going to China that way because the world was not round, right? I mean, they learned this from the Arab navigators that the world is round, So this guy was trying out this thing, and he goes there. He lands up there, and as I said to you, till 1517, till his death, he really believed he was in India. And therefore, the poor people are called Indians. I mean,
right.
Excellent. They're called Indians. When they landed up there, if you read all the mythology, they say that when the West landed up there, they were very welcoming, and they gave them garland and food. They gave them because they took 2 months to get across the Atlantic with no food, nothing, and they were miserable-looking, emaciated people. And the native welcomed them not because but they said, let us feed these poor people, these wretched of the earth. This was the wretched of the earth, and if I can use another argument.
Pronounced term, right?
So they never anticipated that they were going to get murdered and genocidal. Within the first 50 years, something like 35 million people were killed. So you got to place this history of evolution of this Western idea,
right,
in its genealogical roots, its moral roots. We all look at the finished product and don't ask the question, where did this finished product come up from? What were the roots of that finished product?
Precisely.
And so this is one thing I want. I mean, colonization has been with us in all culture. The colonization that came from the Arab world into this world, into our world where you are, but they were never that level. All the Hindus were not wiped out.
Right. Clearly, right.
And the Turks go into Eastern Europe and did not force Turkish language. You and I are speaking English because we were colonized into speaking that language.
Right.
So I mean, that level of hegemonic control of the psyche, spirit, soul was never that practice. Colonialism has been there with us. I mean, we know that Raja Daher question and all that. Okay. Turn it around a little bit. They killed the Native American and they say God brought us here. Now you talk about religion. This is God blessing. We still say God bless America. Right. And as Jeremiah Wright used to say, why the hell should I say God bless America? I was enslaved. How can I say God bless America?
Right.
He was absolutely right. Then they brought in 1617 to 1619, depending on how you date it, but 1619 for sure, these slaves who were caught by the pirates, and they were brought to Virginia as a part of tobacco plantation. So the first slave colonies are for the tobacco plantation, which we all benefited from. Yes. This is all Virginia tobacco. People forget this little virgin tobacco is the queen who was not very virgin, but that's all right. But it's called Virginia, right? You live in Virginia.
That's my place. Yes, my state.
That's your home state. That's why I brought this up. So in 1617, 1619, this gets settled. Then it goes to Mississippi Delta, and it becomes cotton plantation. Cotton is coming from our part of the world.
Yes.
Okay. So you got to understand this American cotton and the slavery is tied to India in a way. When I say India, I mean Indo-Pak subcontinent, right?
Yes.
And the third is that they had gone to Caribbean and taken slaves for sugar plantation. So that's why the Tate and Lyle of the Lyle-Poor factor.
Yes.
You put all this together. This is actually what we call
incredible
this movement of idea. In the end, one has to say that America is the great power. It is because of stolen land and stolen labor. Yeah. For the whites.
Yes.
They were people of color. So America is the first nation that sets up its identity in whiteness.
Right.
Europeans never set it up in whiteness. They set it up in German, I'm French, I'm Dutch, I'm Italian. They were all white, but they hated each other. They fought centuries of war with each other.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
But they come across now, all of them, they have to live together. And because there are two groups of people that are setting up two different color lines. One is the Native American with our color, and you have got the blacks.
Yes.
And in between is the white. So they defined America in terms of immigrants by choice as compared to immigrants by duress.
Yes.
Which is the slaves. And immigrants because against the Native American.
Yes.
So immigrants by choice fighting religious oppression, quote unquote. They never fighting religious oppression. There was only a few Puritans who were beaten by Charles II. But everybody came because they were running. And then they made myth that there was absolutely this huge ship called Mayflower. If you went to a college which I remember a little past that I remember of yours, which always claimed that they were Mayflower children. 102 people. That's all there was in Mayflower. But every American on the East Coast wants to say that my great grandfather was tied to Mayflower because that way that gives them some temperament. The Native American were the oldest citizens of this country. They're not called citizens. Remember, till very late.
Yeah.
And the second oldest people were the blacks. Not 99% of the whites are post 619 in this country.
Yeah.
In this country where I'm sitting. Whereas the blacks have been there all the way through. And they are not considered, they were not considered till 1964, they did not have the right to vote. And right now, every attempt is being made to block that voting, whether it's through Michelle Alexander's work of incarceration of 1.2 to 1.4 million people and kept away from election. They come out, they can't vote. So the blacks are still being kept out of the voting right. And the Native Americans are not allowed because there's not any chaos. So you have got still a very, you and I as immigrants here in America, I mean, you're in Pakistan, but have got a privilege of white with a race stigma to it. You get? We have not got the status of a Native American who has been living here, or of the black who has been enslaved.
Right.
So we benefit one side of it and not from the other side of it.
Right.
And my point is, in solidarity with the victims, if you take that as a criteria of justice, I have to side myself with the Native Americans and the blacks and not with the whites.
Yes.
And I think that should be the case for all Asian migrants.
Right.
Because they are the true heirs of what is the beneficial, but they have never been part of it. So America set up for the first time this race paradigm,
right,
which then Europe followed, right? So Europe has talked about rationality, but it has never. Remember, without the Asian and African immigrants in the war-driven Europe, there would be no Europe in the contemporary state, because they did the labor. All the same age group that actually provides you the labor and provision, as I was talking about the dependency, was killed in the war. And it was the immigrants who came and reestablished the economies of this country. We keep talking about the Marshall Plan, the Marshall Plan, the Marshall Plan. We don't talk about the immigration plan that allowed these countries to come back. And they are always seen as living out of the grace of this devastated Europe, which had been totally destroyed. I mean, people forget the Battle of the Britain had killed everybody.
Right.
Yeah. And so, and Europe, West Germany was completely destroyed. They did not have colonies of their own, because that was taken in 1916 away from them after the First World War, during the First World War. So they imported the allies from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so that you set up this Islamophobia roots all tied to this series of movements. These are, the point is, Islamophobia was not Islamophobia.
Right.
As, hello, can you see? I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay. So, okay, good. So one of the problems that you get is that you get that this Turkish rule, that the Turks came there, but they were not given citizenship. They were called literally the Gastarbeiter, the guest worker. Whereas Britain, by the Queen, invited soldiers who had served the war machinery to come and make Britain. So they did all the labor, they reconstructed the industrial base, the infrastructure, which was all destroyed in the war. I mean, people forget this is a 6-year war with the heaviest concentration of bombing, because the Luftwaffe was bigger than all of the Allies' air force put together. And the tanks were bigger than all the Allies put together. France was gone, the colonial base. England was gone as a colonial base. Holland had gone as a colonial base. 3 major colonial empires were crushed to death. They had to import labor from the ex-colonies. Germany had no ex-colonies, so they went to Turkey. But they were Muslims. Pakistan, most of the people who served the war in Africa was Muslims. The Muslims from. So for the first time, the encounter that comes on Islamophobia was that up to now we have dealt with them as those we are not going to reside with. We are going to dominate. Right. All of a sudden, they are going to be, how is a system capable of providing equality for those who are residing in this country and don't look ethnically like us? Right. And do not have. So France was laissez-faire, it just started with the war on the. But all of a sudden, religious identity becomes so important that Turkey could not become part of the European Union. Nothing to do with history, because Europe was rooted in Turkey. This is what I was trying to say to you about Constantinople. But this is where the Roman Empire has settled till 1453. Turkey has been taken over most of Europe, on the eastern side of Europe, from 1306 onward. So, and that they had attacked the gate of Vienna in 1529. So this nonsense, I give you one more better example. In 1894, 1895, the Berlin Conference takes place.
Yes.
So this is just to give you another series of colonial crap. Sorry for my language. But they sat there in Berlin. Berlin had just come out of its princely statecraft and its imperial role. So you have a Weimar Republic getting established. And it's the democratic side of it. This is not going back to princes and religion. And they divide the world. They sit down there and they said, oh, Belgium, you take this part of Africa. This is the division of Africa. This is what we call the incredible arrogance. They sat there and they just made the world. France gets this, England gets this, Belgium gets this, just like that. From on top, just side. And then they walked in and between themselves, they could trade. But no African was ever allowed to trade with them. So this whole establishment of the Eastern and the Western great African culture and society, and in the middle part going up to Timbuktu, which is the biggest old library, was all gone. So all of a sudden, so the worst part of the resistance always came from the Muslims. This is Nigeria, the northern part, which we get into problem with this, right? And the eastern part was, people like Darul Islam. People forget the name. Darul Islam is Darul Islam. So this connectivity, and then they came to Europe, came to India, and at the time India was ruled by the Mughals. These are the trade centers.
Right.
So when they get to Europe, there's a great series of articles done by Dalrymple, which is to say that when the British came, they wanted to copy the Nawabs of India. They wanted to copy because they were culturally so much superior and so well advanced. All of a sudden, once the colonization begins to happen, they begin to look down upon these people as being uncivilized. So on the one level, they were highly civilized, highly developed, and then within 100 years, that changed the pattern. Now, for the first time, you were getting laboring class. This is the difference between America and Europe. In America, the Muslims who came were all professionals of one kind or the other. Or they came to study and stayed behind or something. But the labor that came into Europe after the construction of the war, and their children are now getting educated, but they came there as laboring class.
Right.
So on the one hand, you had classism. On the other hand, you had a cultural prejudice. Added to that was the veneer of Islam, because these people wanted to practice their religion. England had a claim to a religion of the state. All these states had religion. The only state that do not have a religion of the state is those that were communist or had become part of communist world. Every European state has a state religion, whether you like it or not. We get very upset about having. What we did was wrong, and I think, is that we had a multi-religious society as we began, and we forced upon it a kind of Islam. The very people who were against, and rightly so they were against, because that was a nation state in the name of Islam was a problem. Right. I mean, so
all of these are colonial constructions that we just adopted lock, stock, and barrel and applied it, and with its consequences.
Yeah. I mean, people like Maududi and all that were all against the formation of Pakistan. But once Pakistan was formed, they then said, we'll lay a claim on it, which was not the claim of the founding. And this is true in Algeria. You can go down. All the first movement of liberation were tied with intellectual, rational, quote unquote, Europeanized, West Oxificated people. And I'm very sorry, I'm not going to take names here because of that. It could be trouble for you. But you know what I'm talking about. These were not people who were steeped in our own tradition or knew anything about it. So when you talk about Islamophobia, what Islamophobia is, because we have all of a sudden neighbors in our own country who are, and I use the word our country because I'm living in the West right now, who are culturally different, who have a specific divine understanding of reality, who have an understanding of ethics and morality and culture tied to their own thing. And I think one of the problems that you're getting with them is that the Muslims are not looking at new ways of appropriating its Islamic heritage. People forget that when they were living in Abyssinia, in Habash.
Yes.
The first migration of the Muslim is not from Mecca to Medina, but from Mecca to Najaf, right? I mean, to the Habash area. There were Muslims who were living in that context. The plurality experience of Islam is not being emphasized by these very conservative Muslim reading.
Right.
That Islam had lived as a minority in a number of places,
right,
and adopted and set up this notion of Sharia in reworked forms. And it's not,
right.
So they go back, oh, we want to go back to Medina.
Right.
Right? This is the point. Oh, हमारा जो Prime Minister है वो बार-बार बोलता है Medina. But people forget that Medina had a huge Jewish population, and there was a contract, there was a covenant, there was a constitution, if I can use whatever you want to. The Mishak Medina is not a small thing. It's a first contact of allowing religious diversity as a core. And it says if anybody mistreats you, they are damned to hell.
Right.
I mean, read that text. Then you have the contract with the Rajani Christians. You have a contract with St. Catherine's Monastery. All series of documents that are prophet. Why is that sunnat not followed in writing our new?
Or for that matter, in pre-modern times, historians like, and you would probably know them at Columbia University, Richard Bullock, argues that in pre-modern times, Muslim Andalusia was probably the most pluralist, a harmonious harmony between the
this notion of
the planet.
Yeah. And then you get to the point that they came to India, they were a minority. Few people tried to impose, but nobody got wiped out, nobody got killed, and Hinduism was allowed to prosper on its own locatedness.
Right.
And that people forget this, that that at the end of the day, if you take all the Muslim population, both of all three countries, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, you get about 25% of the total population of the subcontinent.
Right.
Why is it that they ruled from 1000s all the way up to 1857, and they did not force everybody to become a Muslim?
Right. Right.
This
is the Bernard Lewis line that
Islam
spread by the sword everywhere. And you ask someone, what is the largest Muslim country today? Indonesia, where not a single Arab or any Muslim soldier went to. Islam
absolutely. And no war was carried out against the local people. The old argument I used to make is that the image you read is that Islam is carrying sword in one hand and the Quran in another hand, and they're galloping their horses and beating on the natives, right? And I said, no, this is when I was teaching Introduction to Islam. I don't teach that anymore. But this is a graduate student, right? And I said, think of this imagery and then go. I said, remember, Islam cannot do things with left-handed, so they have to carry the sword in the right hand. But they also carry the Quran in the right hand because they can't hold the Quran in the right. So either the whole India, the Muslim army was left-handed because they could not hold the Quran in the left hand. So they must have become all left-handed. Right? And second, that Islam did not have a piercing sword. They had a shimitar, which is a cutting sword. I'm talking technology here, right? You have to cut it like this. You can't thrust like the Roman swords or thrusting swords, right? You gallop and you thrust. They actually cut, because the argument was not just to kill only, but to also cut and maim people so that they won't be continuing the fight with you. And then what was riding the horse? How were they holding the horse to go left and right if there were reins? So the teeth must have been extraordinarily strong. So I said, see how bad that image. But this is a common image. Look at the poems like Song of Saracens and all these things that come.
Yes.
So all I'm saying is Islamophobia has been generated in a particular. Islam was much dreaded in Europe, and so those old dreads are coming back because Islam was sitting at the doors of what was called Europe. It was attacking all of these points. In 1529, when they hit the gates of Vienna, nobody still knows why they left, because they laid a siege and Vienna was going to fall. People forget that anybody who drinks coffee is a Muslim according to the Christian fatwas. I literally, the fatwa by the cardinals was that if you drink coffee, this is a Muslim conspiracy to convert you to Islam.
Right. Well, that means I'm a good Muslim.
I've just finished mine. But this Kawa, the Kavi, the God who is Kavi, Kawa, this series of issues were all. But we skip over all of these things.
Yes.
In order to say, see, Islam is less developed, and therefore they do these prejudicial things so that it come out. It is not. I wrote a book in South Africa for my Muslim friends called Islamophobia or Restorative Justice. This is published in 2006 in South Africa. And my argument was that if at the same time this cartoon controversy was taking about this freedom of speech, and I said, it's very interesting that people are picking this up. First of all, that you are actually trying to slander other people's religion. If there's, the one thing that we learn in our part of the world, but also in any concept of fairness, is that you don't malign some aspect of the person who feels vulnerable. You don't take their vulnerable point and beat on them, except for domination. You only do it to beat them. So this cartoon controversy that started in Denmark and then went with Charlie Hebdo, and then came into France and come back again, and they all argued for freedom of speech. And I said, look at the two places where the freedom of speech. Look at the European Convention on Human Rights and look at the Universal Declaration. Both of them have a curb on the freedom of speech when it offends, or because they came in the context of Jews who had been beaten in 1945, till 1945, let me put it. So the Universal Declaration comes out in 1948 with that in mind, that how has European rational society failed?
Right.
And not the religious society. People forget that all these genocides that have been committed by the rational societies.
Right.
At the most rational point of their history, not at the religious point. Yes, the wars that were fought between 1517 and 1648 were religious wars, but they were internal religious wars in Christianity between the Calvinists and the Lutherans
and one can argue, Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali, that in some ways they were intertwined with what we can call proto-nationalist sentiments.
Yeah, it started nationalism. Yeah. The four criteria of the Treaty of Westphalia is homogeneous ethnicity. Ethnicity, that's where the word nationalism comes from. Ethnos. Huh? The ethnos means nation. Those nations that I'm a German and you are Dutch and I hate you. And you look at me and you say, you are a Belgian and I hate you. They hated each other. So this argument was to set up homogeneous ethnicity, homogeneous ethos, that means the language, culture, eating habits, all that. Homogeneous religiosity, that you are not only a Christian, you are a Catholic. You are not only a Catholic, you are denominationally Dominican. And so and in the Protestants also. So you have this homogeneity. America was the first nation that will get set up. People forget, 1924, Islam gave up on religious nationalism.
Right.
In 1924, they gave up on religious nationalism. Right. In 1947, we established a Muslim nation.
Right.
And those were the two ends of what is known as the political theory basis. One is this notion of the Khalifatullah.
Yeah.
And
the abolition of the caliphate in 1920. Yeah.
And the other side was the Ummah.
Yeah.
Not a nation state. Finished. So you set up. So when they keep talking to me about, Pakistan, I said, you can't have a Muslim state without being a fully OIC is not Ummah, whatever else it is. Right. Ummah had all this ethnic mixing, religious mixing. In Medina, in Mishaq Medina, there's actually the word Ummah used 6 times. Only once it is used exclusively for Muslim. It's 5 times it is used as people dwelling in Medina. There are Jews for sure.
Yes.
There are Hanifs for sure. There are pagans for sure. And there's at least 2 Christian teachers.
Right. So, this is even in modern times, late pre-modern times, Marshall Hodgson, he writes about this, the Islamic civilization that included all of these various religious groups. People wonder where these Jewish communities in these Muslim lands. Well, this is where they went to, fleeing the persecution in Europe.
Yes, yes. In 1492, when the Jews are getting kicked out, and by immediately 6 years after the 1492, they're getting kicked out. We have actual record of this, right? I mean, this is a recorded thing. There's either 50,000 or 200,000 Jews left Spain and landed up both in North Africa, but a large number into Turkey. And the Sultan Turkey said, "What's wrong with these Christians? They're kicking out all these qualified people." So he actually invited them all. So 70,000 Jewish male, which means with their family, so there's more than 70,000 people, landed up in Constantinople. There is still, if you get to Constantinople next time, one of the things that's coming out of Bosporus, those roads that go up towards the Sultan Ahmed Mosque and the Topkapi Museum and all that, is a road which has got one of the oldest Jewish temple which is there in Europe. It's still there. I saw that in 1973. I've not gone there since, but I saw that. I went there to see it. You have all these preservation of these things, right? When we talk about Islamophobia, you have got a revival of all those fear of Islam.
Yeah.
One. Two, that they're now living next door to us rather than colonized and sent as lesser people out there. That the children are now playing and growing up with it. We have got now a third to fourth generation of Muslim kids who have not grown up on a my Bapali Adathinja. They're actually grown up as British or French or German. They're no longer, "Oh, sir, you're helping me," because they came from the working classes poor. This generation that is there, the people who are now teaching at the universities, people who are now running institutions. We have got Minister of Finance in England who's in India. So all these series of people who came there, a large chunk of them are Muslim. And so their great grandchildren are Muslim. And they haven't given up on the Muslim identity. As a matter of fact, the argument against Spencer that I was talking about is that religion hasn't gone away.
Right.
It has come back, and it's come back in expressions which are not always healthy.
Right.
But it has come back. It is so this argument that all the unhealthiness is all that is religion, and all that is healthy is rational. It's just nonsense argument. This is my argument. So I think you have got unhealth here. You've got a lot of unhealth in the rational side. You've got a lot of good point in religion. You've got a lot of good point in rationality. And the question is, how did this is where Vatican II came in? Where people forget that the Vatican II did not begin with the liberation.
You must have a hard time making this argument amongst our Pakistani liberal friends.
Yes, yeah, and I agree with them. You
must
know,
have a very hard time.
I come every year. This is the first year I have not come in 7 years. I come every year and spend 10 to 12 weeks in Pakistan, in Karachi now mostly, because that's where my hometown is. But I get to Lahore, I get to Islamabad, I get to Pindi, I even get to Peshawar. But my bulk of my time is with Karachi, with my old friends, who I knew at the time of my political activism. This is the time when we were not in the safest or securest places.
Right.
So
exactly.
So they have remained close friends. I don't drink much alcohol at all. I mean, I've just given up on that for reasons. I think if it offends people, one shouldn't do these things anyhow. So, but I don't do that. But I eat them and have my being with them. These are people who I breathe and yet I disagree with them on very fundamental level. One of our old friends who was a friend with you and a colleague is a person I disagree the most violently with.
Yes, I think I know who you mean.
I know. That's why I'm not taking the name, because I don't want to take anybody's name.
Right.
But I mean, the point, the problem is because of the shallowness of knowledge. That's the problem with it. There is actually a depth of knowledge, but the pretense that you have
right.
is that you are the only one who is carrying the knowledge game any further. And I think that's to देख लकीर का फकीर होना knowledge नहीं बनाते, चाहे वो साइंस की हो, चाहे वो enlightenment में हो, चाहे वो religion की हो. मेरी argument है कि God has given us this very important tool. God has given us this, a very important tool. When we combine the two, we get the knowledge which makes changes in the lives of people.
Right.
And if we are not there, I want to die with a thought that I did all the best I could. And I want to die and meet my Lord. And I mean this very seriously to you. I'm not trying to, but I want to meet with the joy that, yes, I fought a good fight. I ran a good race. And I'm not looking for crown because I think this is just nonsense that we want to get all this wealth and accusation in heaven. I think we should all live in an egalitarian society. The old argument in Communist Manifesto is everybody eats and drinks and goes fishing when he wants, reads the book when he wants. I mean, what else do you want in life? Your health is taken care of. You don't have to worry about your children's education. You don't have to worry about who's going to pay for my next food. That is heaven. Agar firdaus barru is amiyas. Hamiyas. That's the argument at the bottom of Kutub Benar. To me, this is my concept of heaven. This is firdaus.
Yeah, Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali, let me conclude this conversation by getting to the present moment right now.
Yeah.
And particularly the way we have seen, I mean, you have described it very well about a lot of people have looked to, of course, much less so now, towards the United States and America as the pinnacle, the peak of civilization. Of course, now it's not so much anymore. But you have described very well that, look, the development of this great American country took place on the basis of genocide, of enslavement. And the third thing I would add to that is the war against the global South, particularly over the 20th century and the 21st century. So this has made America great, develop the country. So, but right now, one, where do you see things heading globally in terms of the United States, its role as an empire, is it waning and so on? And more importantly, for our viewership, what, in your opinion, should faith-affirming people, what responsibility do they have to respond to what we can call the pharaonic system of empire? And it's an empire that has, yes, maybe at the center, the state of the U.S., but that empire is all throughout the world with its institutions and structures of white supremacy, patriarchy, predatory corporate capitalism, and of course, the now climate catastrophe that we're confronting as well. So I know that's a lot, but
let me. I mean, you put a huge. This is why I said you and I need to have a couple of hours of conversation. But let me put it very quickly. Remember that America as an empire had begun its first roots in 1890s, with the Cuba and also with Philippines, right? When this is the argument that the Rudyard Kipling, writing White Man's Burden, is writing it for America to become a colonial empire. I mean, this is the white man's burden, right? So he's saying, go and take over Philippines. I mean, we should be in 1895. It's written 1899, it gets published.
Right.
So that's the roots of it. So it's about 200 years later than the other European empire systems, right? Spain and Portugal, Iberian Peninsula, with the sacking of the Spanish Armada, the British and the Dutch, and then the French, right? So this is America is no more part of it anywhere. It begins to emerge as a part of the colonial structure, but it has a problem with the colonial, not because its foundational idea of itself could not be colonial. I mean, this is so they live with the schizophrenia. On the one hand, they want to be like the other European power. On the other hand, they say, no, we are a democracy. We don't have monarchy, and we don't have aristocracy, and we don't have nobility, and we don't have stated landed social class.
Right.
So it lived with this So the edge of the people who were progressive hated this colonial exercise. And then they continued with slavery. People forget that Jim Crow law stayed, I mean, till 1964. So 1865, America has just gotten over its civil war, right? I mean, 1861 to 1865. And then immediately followed the Indian Wars, because all these soldiers that were getting out of this war situation had to have jobs. So what did they do? They come together, North and the South come together to beat upon. And the compromise they made was Jim Crow law in the South, right? So the Jim Crow law is basically Bostonian law. People forget that it is not a East Southern law. So this is so all this argument, oh, Northeast was more liberal. I think, get the hell out of here. This is not true. But so you set up these patterns are slightly different. America actually becomes an imperial power after Second World War. First World War they tried, but they couldn't pass. Second World War, because the European empires had all died. So if you look at the pattern, Spanish, Iberian, 1492, 1497, Vasco da Gama, Christopher Columbus, right? India. 1548, with the Spanish Armada gone, the British start going. 1602, they set up the East India Company. The East India Company becomes a paradigm for everybody. Danish East India Company, French East India Company. They all like East India. When they say East India, they say there's a West Indies. Right? So we are the India they're going, but they call it East India, right? So they're all East India Company. 1602, this East India Company gets set up, and then starts this commercialization of colonialism. I mean, this whole series of spices and trades. And the establishment of these small little islands to become powerful and wealthy was this, right? I mean, people forget that these are, I mean, what is Holland? It's a waterlogged country. I mean, it has got nothing. Right? So that it could go all the way up to Indonesia and go through the Cape. As you know, this area better than anybody, to go through the Cape and colonize this southern part, all this thing, right?
Absolutely.
So America did not. In 1945, these old empires collapsed. And the two empires that emerged were both federated empires. USSR, United States of Soviet Republics, and United States of America. These were not nation states. They were actually confederated states, as compared to the French and the Dutch and the English, which are nation states, which are ethnic states. So in that concept was already an opening up of a multi-ethnic group. Not multi-ethnic as you and I will understand, multi-ethnic of white.
Right.
Yeah. Right. When we talk about multi-ethnic, we talk about whites and all of us. But when they talk about multi-ethnicity, they talk about, there's European here. So the melting pot was not for you and me, it was a white soup.
Right.
But
right, exactly.
So now and then a few pieces of black pepper was thrown into it, but it was not color. Yeah. So when you take these movements, America becomes an imperial power because everybody abdicates their role. And so the ex-colonies had to be reoccupied. And this is where Samuel Huntington first got his name. That once they're moving out of this colonial pattern, they need to have a stable Western institution. So that was the rest of it. The army was that. And so if you remember, Samuel Huntington went and served a Yukon.
Yeah.
Now, people forget this little connection, right? So,
yes.
So his accusation, so he writes his book, right? I mean, we all know about this Islamic book, The Clash of Civilization. But before that, this most famous book was that the transition period from colonialism to democracy has to be provided. And the army was the most Western institution of all the institutions that was left behind.
Yes.
And the second was bureaucracy.
Modernization theory, political
science. Absolutely. And that's how the whole modernization and everything came. So you had bureaucracy. Notice the word, the power or the rule of the bureau. Bureaucratia. Or Naukarshahi. Oxymoron. In Urdu, oxymoron. You can't be a Naukar and a Shah at the same time. But that's what it was. The British colonial bureaucracy was. So they were not. And then they were called civil servants. They were not civil. They were not servants. They were uncivil masters. So, whole series of these things were. So all kind of euphemism was thrown out. Army was a completely, it had all the tools were made in the West. So that means the dependency theory that Samir Amin talked about later is all actually related to the army, because you needed your tanks to be operational, your planes to be operational, you had guns to be made, the bullets to be made, and we did not have the wherewithal of establishing. So the initial Western, Pakistan army till very recently had all its command in English. वो जो बेचारा रंगरूट आता था उसको समझ में नहीं आती थी, मगर उसको ये पता था कि लेफ्ट राइट चलना है. मैं हमेशा ये कहता हूँ, anybody who learns to walk because of the command of somebody, is not really capable person. You say left right. अपने मैं नहीं चलूंगा left right, मैं right left चलूंगा. करो martial law. So this is all army rule, right? I mean, the cantonments were cantonments, and you had no longer the natives, you had the cities. All this series of modeling were kept intact. There, in that context, America was providing all the things, because all of a sudden there were two empires and they were clashing on central ideological reasons. The other colonies were not fighting. They were all looking for wealth. They were all looking for spices. They were fighting for the spice control of the trade routes, but they were not fighting a quote-unquote ideological war between capitalism and communism. This is the first time. So you had two empires emerge, and they're fighting ideological war as well. So they say, who's better? So as long as this Cold War remained, we got militarized, we got all kind of martial laws, but we also got benefit from it, because they were saying, oh, if we don't do it right, these guys are going to become communists. Or if we don't do it right, they will become capitalists and they'll go to America. So this having these two masters allowed us to actually negotiate, the peanut factor that Zia could say to peanuts, I don't care, don't give me 400 billion. And then you became the second recipient of American aid, because there was Russia in Afghanistan. So, it's got nothing to do with America being beneficial or beneficent to us. So if you look at all these series of issues, at the end of the Cold War, what happens is that you have a collapse of it, and no longer are these playable the same way. And then the question is, America says, we have set up all these institutions. We may or may not give you any money. So then we played out, okay, you walked with your hat always in your hand when you saw this person coming. You didn't take it off when you went into his office, but you just walked around constantly. So this, whatever else you say, and I hate everything about Trump. But what he did was he let you know. He played the game so nudely, so nakedly, that we all got to see this game in its full display, that it was not for any kind of beneficence, any kind of goodness, any kind of ethics, any kind of morality, any kind of virtue, but this was a complete self-grabbing power. So we got to see the nakedness. And I think Europeans who still, वो मैं हमारे उर्दू में एक मुहावरा है, कहते हैं 900 चूहे खा के बिल्ली हज को चली. याद है ना? 900 चूहे खा के बिल्ली हज को चली. Europe has become that billy. It's always hitting out on America, whereas it has been eating these 900 mice and all its colonial roots, whether it's England or it's France or it's Holland or it's Germany or it's Denmark or it's Sweden. All of them have a चूहे खाने वाली बिल्लियां. अब सबके सब जाके हज करते हो, बोलते हैं अल्लाह मियां मेरे को कहे, मैं 5 वक्त की नमाज पढ़ता हूँ. So this morality that 5 वक्त की नमाज is being made is coming out, but it is being challenged by Islam in the presence of these societies, because Islam does not accept this hypocrisy. I'm not saying that these are good people either, but I'm saying that this hypocrisy is so visibly present in your face. So I end up always fighting with Europeans. Don't put on this self-righteous look, Munafiqun. This is what the word is for them. Right? The Quran has more time munafiqun than any other sin in the world. So my point is, America is right now no longer a power. Its power is being challenged at every quarter. All European countries are challenging its power. There is a consolidated third option of Europe. We've got a consolidated new option of China now for the last 20, 30 years. So you've got no longer unipolar, first bipolar, then unipolar, and now multipolar. society. Russia is wanting to claim back its status without having the United States. America is going to start. This is why my worry with Biden is, I like this government, I like the guy. My worry is that old patterns are going to come back to be set in place, which have been all destroyed. Nobody cares about Trump. Nobody liked him. Nobody liked America. All of a sudden, those of us who kept our mouth shut, I used to bite my tongue so I wouldn't say what I wanted to say. Now I can say it against America. So it's the end of the imperial power base. The question is, what shape does America take? It will play a major role. It is the largest economy. It has got the largest army. It has got the largest wherewithal for fighting a war. So it always carries that threat. The big stick, carry a big stick, even if you... And I think Biden is going to be carrying a big stick and not talking too loud, as compared to Trump, who talked loud and did not carry the big stick. So you will get that. And the third element of all of this, to me, bothers me. America is no longer going to continue to play a major role in productive economies. It's going to continue to play a critical and heavy role in service economies and on what you call capital economies. It's not going to be a productive center ever. I think that role of America is finished. That it produced cars, it produced steel, all that role is gone. And with the petroleum declining, it will decline. I don't care who is in power. Trump words notwithstanding, petroleum economies are going to get less and less. And I think Saudi Arabia is making clear moves towards that, and UAE. My worry about all of this is that in this, some people are going to genuinely suffer. The Palestinians are going to be a genuine victim in all of this. And I think unless you and I do something about it, or whatever we can in our little roles, I think the Palestinian people are going to be genuinely suffering, because they've got three problems with them. They are blocking the Middle East, quote-unquote, peace program, whatever that word is. I never understood what the salam or shalom or irony means in this, because it's not.
American Zionist hegemony over the Middle East. That's
well, see, the point is that even the Zionists don't care about America. Let me tell you. I mean, but the point is they are now free to do what they like without any camouflage. मतलब वो जो नकाब लगाया हुआ था ना, वो उतर गया. अब हमारे को उनका फेस नजर आना शुरू हो गया.
Right.
पहले तो ये था ना, नकाब था यहाँ तक. अमेरिका उनको नकाब प्रोवाइड कर दिया करता था हर चीज के अंदर. Oh, put a universal. Let's go to the General Assembly. Let's go. Nobody really cares. And the point is, the Arabs have become the surrogate representative of the naqab for Israel. You know, the UAE, the Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And in all this, Iran becomes the enemy.
Yes.
To me, Iran since 1979, and I say this to you in a public domain, Iran to me has been the most democratic, most ethical, most Muslim of all the states that go with a majority Muslim population. 1979, not only because of Khomeini, but they got rid of the Shah. They broke the hegemony of the Americans. The first time American CIA-controlled realities were shattered.
Right.
And people don't realize. 1979 is a big year.
Yes.
Afghanistan, Russians are gaye, and at the same time, Islam is becoming established in a state which is completely bankrupt of any morality, you know, in the Shah, backed by the US, never retrieved back now. So that Iran is a problem because it's a failed policy of American hegemonic structure.
Right.
Whereas all these other people were, sorry, वो क्या बोलते हैं, चमचागिरी कर करके अपनी जिंदगियां गुजारी. अब आजादी मिली तो मर जाएंगे. So, but Iran has had more elections than the whole of the Arab world put together.
Right.
All of the Arab world put together. Have a look at it. It's had something like 19 elections, 20 elections. Right. And they elect people at the lowest level of election. And the West does not accept its democracy. And you have a king and his nephew and his son, and killers of people, everything else, women are not allowed, democracy is not allowed, are all of a sudden the champion of our faith. So that's the level of American. So hegemony allows you to exercise hypocrisy, exercise lies. I mean, Trump proved it to us. How often can you lie? As I keep saying, truth were the commas in a sentence of lies. It was a small punctuation. The smallest punctuation is a comma, right? The series of lies, and you had a punctuation of truth in there. Punctuation of truth. But I don't think we're going to get that, but we are going to get that argument that America must come back to its glory that has been taken away from it.
Yes.
And
Dr. Amjad-Ali, I just wanted to say that as a final thought that I want your reflections on is that still there is this impulse, this narrative within, particularly the Muslim communities within the West, within the United States, to say that how can we in fact become part of the power structure, and that may help us then change American foreign policy. How can we become as strong as quote unquote the Jews or the Jewish, the Israeli lobby, and so on and so forth? And that's where I want to kind of wrap up, in which you can help explain to us what liberation theology has to offer people, faith-affirming people, in responding to an empire like the United States right now.
See, the Jews had suffered. Please understand that all through from 1492 onwards, they constantly suffered. People forget that North Africa had become the Renaissance point. You know, people like Musa bin Maimun, you know, Moses Maimonides sitting in North Africa. But Jews had suffered all the way through, from the time of the expulsion from Israel in 1096, in 96 AD, all the way through. They've just been constantly suffering. For them to make this kind of compromise with power was first through banking systems, you know, and the advancing of the loans and all that, and then trying to control certain institutional life and patterns in which the prejudice was generated, so that education became an important point for them, banking and control of money became an important point, and information became. So that it was a well thought out process, not to become themselves powerful, but to enable that society to continue to exist. Of course, in that process, a lot of these guys became very powerful. The problem is what I hear when I talk with my Muslim brothers and sisters, and I talk with a lot of them, is that they want power. And they think by acquiring power, so the telos one was a telos of survival, the other was a telos of acquiring power. How do we acquire power? We acquire all the skills it's the same thing that we did with the Westoxification. How do we become powerful? Equal to the colonialists who had made us unpowerful. We acquire all the skills and all the tools of that thing, you know, this natural science and all that. What my problem with it is that it is done in the name of religion. It's not done in the name of power. If it was done in the name of power, I said, go on. If you put religion as a camouflage for that, we are Muslims and therefore we must acquire power, I find that very hard, because in Islam, at the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, he had a katora and a chadar. That's the power he acquired. He died without any wealth. And you look at till you get to Muawiyah, you don't get any wealth accusation. I mean, Ali died poor. Usman died relatively wealthy, but Umar died poor. So you got this, and of course, Abu Bakr. When you get to this notion of power for the sake of acquiring, that the power allows you to acquire the wealth you want, then you have given up on the notion of ethics and virtue and morality and justice. If you keep those always in focus, which I keep talking to my Muslim and to my Christian friend and liberation friends, is that if you keep justice as a center, to me, by the way, the most beautiful value of any value is justice. And justice in all its manifestation: distributive justice, retributive justice, restorative justice, punitive justice, commutative justice, all these 7 elements of justice that are there. We should keep them. We should not leave that exclusively in distributive terms, because I can distribute it, but I can still think that you're less than me. I can give you, I've got 2 cups, I'll give you 1 cup, but I say, well, I'm giving it to a person less than that, But if I value you as I value myself and value you as more than myself, then the question is ethics becomes a slightly different context. It's not कि पहले मैं अपने लिए कप रख लूं, अगर मेरे पास ज़्यादा हो गए तो मैं तेरे को दे दूंगा. Sorry, this ethics of distribution is necessary but not sufficient ever. That why do you have 10 cups? Somebody should say, why does Charles have 10 cups? And why do I don't even have 1 cup? This is a question that comes in on this notion of distribution only partly. So I'll say, okay, now I'll give you 2 cups. This is why this notion that in Gotha program Marx said, each according to his need and each according to his abilities. It's a different concept of that. You are a young man. I am now I just turned 70. So I'm very proud of this, that I've reached this age. I don't have the same needs. I don't have any children to go and send them to education. I don't have, a house to build. You're 20, you have a house you need to build for your new family, right? I mean, so we have different needs. I have different ability. I can talk like this. But I don't have those needs. So why should I be accumulating all the wealth? And you, who is now in the process of making life, not have the access to that wealth? There's where the need factor becomes. This is why I think that the Akhri Khutbah of the Prophet becomes a very important manifesto for me. This question of equality and rights, and that you have the only son that was claimed to be son was a black man, a slave.
Right.
And he was the first Muaddin at the Masjid al-Nabawi. I mean, so you got to place these historical facts, that justice is so central to Islamic nature and not power. And this acquisition of power, this is I sound like I'm a Shia, I'm not, but that to begin with the sacrifices of beginning of faith in Hassan and Hussein, it's a very hard notion. Not success, but death as a beginning of faithfulness, as compared to the exercise of power in the Umayyad dynasty. So you've got difference. Ali making a compromise. Again, it sounds like I'm very pro. I'm not. I'm just saying. You look at those moments, and we have taken the moments of power and not taken the moments of ethics and virtue and value as a starting point of faith. When the Prophet left Medina, he had nothing. Who provided them? The city. Remember, these are Mahajir. They were under the dhimma, if I can use that word, of the Madanis, who provided them places to stay, food to eat. They had nothing. They could not take anything with them because they were running away from Mecca. So you got to understand this notion that Islam begins at the moment of persecution. In Mecca, it had to leave home under persecution. It begins to acquire the kind of status it did with the help of those who are not part of the Muhajirun. And so you've got this whole series of other side of the thing that we should look at. And I'm not saying that you should give up on trying to acquire that, but I'm saying, why is it that we don't focus on these sides of Islam? That he was protected by a woman. That the first confession was by a woman. She's the one who said, no, this must be from Allah.
Yes.
Khadija, he's shaking, he's sweating, and he said, yeah, I don't know what I saw. And that his first convert is a woman, and the second is a slave. I mean, look at this question there. Why are you always looking at the Quraysh? The Quraysh were constantly persecuting the Muslims who went to Najaf were followed by the Quraysh. Then Najaf protected them. He said, no, I will give up my life before I give these people. Who are they people? I don't know, but this justice is there. So I'm just saying, lay out that side of Islam. That's the liberation. That's the liberative side. We liberate women, we liberate slaves, we liberate other religion, we provide meaning of justice and ethics for everybody. And that opens the door to different sides. Why do we always go to the 9th century as a criteria when we keep saying we believe in Hadith and Sunnah? Why don't we follow these Hadith and Sunnah? So that, to me, is a side of the Islamic liberation theology I go with. It is actually a much more dynamic, much more just story.
To sum it up, Dr. Charles Amjad-Ali, it's not about trying to get a seat at the table of Pharaoh
Yes.
and
Yes.
the crumbs of Pharaoh. It's about how to dismantle the pharaonic system.
Thank you. Thank you for a perfect metaphor. Perfect metaphor. This is that the table has to be destroyed so everybody can share in the food that is there.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a revolution.
I'm very sorry, but we have run out of time for this session. But of course, we will have you on as much as we can whenever your time permits. This has been a tour de force conversation with you. Thank you so much, Dr. Charles.
Blessings on you and blessing on all of yours, and safety and God's protection.
Thank you so much, and the same to you. Thank you for coming.
Cheers, my brother.
We look forward to the next time.
Bye, my brother.
Bye-bye.